15th of February 2022.
Now I'm pumped up. Good on me.
I have a very hot boyfriend. I was going to say partner, and then I was like, not a lesbian.
From news.com.au. News.com.au.
I'm Andrew Bucklow, and I've got news for you. Do you know which season kicks off on Friday? It's not the AFL season. It's not the NRL season. It's the comedy season. Yes, the Adelaide Fringe starts on Friday, which is the first opportunity of the year for the country's top comedians to perform their new shows. Now, after Adelaide, they'll go on to Melbourne for the International Comedy Festival, which kicks off in March, and then on to Sydney and Brisbane for their respective comedy festivals. So, to celebrate, we've gathered a group of the best comedians in the country, and we've asked them all to answer 3 simple questions. The first thing we asked these comedians to tell us about was their most awkward gigs. Up first is Joel Creasey, who can be heard on Nova's national drive show, Kate, Tim and Joel.
I remember doing a corporate gig for a hotel group in Perth when I was 18. I just started doing stand-up and the microphone didn't work. And not only that, I didn't have a stage. I was performing the dance floor, which was in the middle of the room. I was performing at 5 p.m. The function started at 5 p.m. And between sound check, which was kind of redundant given I didn't have a microphone, and the actual gig, they decided to fill the floor with the dance floor with helium balloons with string attached to them. So not only could nobody hear me, they couldn't see me through the sea of balloons. It was a real nightmare gig, but I took the cash and banked it immediately.
Joel is performing his stand-up show, Basic AF, at the Adelaide Fringe and the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. Up next is one of Australia's most loved comedians. It's Dave Hughes, who can be heard on Today FM's Hughesy, Ed and Erin.
I once did a private gig for a woman who lived in Toorak. She lived in a mansion. Toorak's Melbourne's wealthiest suburb. So I turn up and she says, "You're a surprise. No one knows you're coming." It was going to be in the lounge room. Then she led me into a bedroom and made me dress in some tennis gear and handed me a tennis racket. She said, "That's my husband's tennis clothes and his racket. He's recently lost his job and I want you to joke about being on the dial," because at the time I had a routine about being on the dial. So I walked in the lounge room and then started joking about being on the dial and said, and he's looking at me. I mean, he'd recently lost his job, obviously. He wasn't that happy about the situation. His mum, who appeared to be in her 80s, didn't seem to be that happy. But you know what? A few people laughed. They paid me. Well, she paid me. So, I don't know. I wonder if they're still together.
Hughesy will be performing his show called Trending at the Adelaide Fringe and the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. Time now to hear from Jordan Barr.
The most bizarre gig I'd ever done is when one of my old high school teachers found out that I'd started doing stand-up and basically reached out, had never seen any of my gigs before, and reached out to ask me to come do a 10-minute spot at a teachers' conference that they were hosting at my old high school. And that was, I just before I went on, he said, "You're not too blue, are you?" And I said, "I think you should have done your research before you hired me for this, Mr. Robson."
You can catch Jordan's show Dreams at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. All right, now we're going to hear from a guy called Brett Blake.
What is the most bizarre gig you've ever done? It was at a football club, or I think it was a party and there was some footy dudes there, but there was a lot of bikies at this party and they kind of found out that I did stand-up comedy and I had no choice but to do a gig for them. It wasn't an option, but also there was no microphone, no stage, barely a light, and just some dude in leather just screaming at everyone to shut the hell up while I do my material. And I did 5 minutes and it was awful. Yeah, I hated every moment, but I didn't have a choice, so there you go.
Brett will be performing his show Smoko King at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. Up next is the host of Triple M's Marty Sheargold show. It's Marty Sheargold.
The most bizarre gig I've done, possibly Miss Nude Australia. That was pretty heavy backstage, I'm not going to lie.
And up next is one of my favourites, Sam Taunton.
The most bizarre show I've probably ever done, there've been so many, just in weird places, different parts of the world. But the weirdest one was at Rottnest Island. And it was bizarre because this guy got on stage during my set and started telling this very racist joke. And then this other guy in the crowd was like, "You can't say that, that's horrible." And then they got on stage and started pushing and started fighting. And then all their friends kind of got involved. It just turned into this huge brawl within the pub. And, people are fighting the crowd. I'm still on stage, by the way, at the moment. I'm still trying to do my show. I'm like, hey, guys, you guys seen the bloody news in Canberra or whatever? People don't care. They're fighting. And they had to shut the whole show down. They had to kick everyone out. And then the worst part is the guy that told the racist joke, he was the ferry driver to get out to Rottnest Island. He gets fired because it's bad for their public image. And we all had to wait, almost 24 hours for another ferry to get back to the mainland.
Sam's show Yo Ho Diablo is playing at the Adelaide Fringe, the Canberra Comedy Festival, Melbourne Comedy Festival and Brisbane Comedy Festival. He gets around. All right, up next we're going to hear from a guy called Oliver Coleman.
Well, earlier this year I did a gig at the Victorian Scout Jamboree. That was a pretty odd gig. Not necessarily my target demographic, 10 to 14-year-old scouts. But it was fun nonetheless. Odd because it was on like a giant stage in the middle of a cow paddock. And just before we were due to do the concert, there was a big dust storm which knocked over all the scouts' tents. So most of the scouts were busy at the campsite kind of putting their tents back together. So we, the comedians, just performed to about 40 to 45 tiny little scouts running around a paddock playing tiggy, paying no attention to the comedians. So I just ended up throwing donuts at them, and then they threw them back at me, and we had a fun time throwing donuts at each other.
Oliver will be performing his show Sublime at the Adelaide Fringe and the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. The next thing we asked the comedians to tell us about was the jokes they've regretted saying on stage. Up first is Dave Hughes.
I once talked to a guy in the front row. The gig was going well, but the guy didn't appear to be looking at me, so I said, mate, I'm over here, stop looking up at the lights. And he matter-of-factly said, I'm cross-eyed, and most people didn't hear what he said, but I lost the plot for about 5 minutes. It was very unprofessional, and the crowd were thinking that I had gone insane, but I just got the giggles. I mean, I didn't want to. I felt bad for the guy. He didn't seem to care. It was just his life. But I do regret asking him that question, and I've never again asked an audience member why they're not looking at me.
There's so many jokes I regret saying on stage. Pretty much all of them that don't get laughs I regret saying on stage. But I think the most one, I used to do a bit years ago about Grant Denyer when he was in the papers for, let's say, experimenting with a few drugs that keep you awake for a long period of time. Anyway, I used to do that joke and it would destroy everywhere I would go. People would love it. And then one day I did it and Grant Denyer was in the crowd and I had to look face to face with him. And I saw him after the show and he said, nice set, mate. Maybe work on a few of those.
That was Sam Taunton and here's Jordan Barr.
The joke that I regret most saying on stage kind of has nothing to do with the joke itself and more to do with the fact that my parents had decided to surprise come see me do stand-up, which is always really great, very supportive. They also decided to surprise sit in the front row. So when I was halfway through delivering a punchline about sexual favours, I clocked eyes with them and I do wish that I had chosen a different joke and not performed that on stage that night.
Well, I used to do a joke where I would put little pieces of Lego up my bum and then do a little dance around and then pull out magically the completed Lego model from my rectum. It was a great joke. It was high art. It was beautiful, beautiful art. However, one night, whilst doing the little dance around, I did fall off the stage and broke my wrist. So I regretted doing the joke that night because of the broken wrist situation.
That was Oliver Coleman. Time now to hear from Marty Sheargold, who's performing in Perth and Brisbane in March and Canberra in April.
What's a joke that I've regretted saying on stage? Well, I don't really have any regrets, it has to be said. There was one vision-impaired woman. If I had my time over again, I might rethink some of it.
Let's be honest, the majority of heckles are crap. Right? I mean, anyone who's sitting in the audience who thinks they can be funnier than an actual comedian is either mistaken or drunk. But every now and then, Every now and then, there's a good one. A heckle so good that it cracks up not only everyone in the crowd, but also the performer on stage. So we've asked the comedians to tell us about the best heckle they've ever received. And up first is Dave Hughes.
I was in Edinburgh doing a late night show which starts at 2 a.m. called Late and Live. And it was advertised as come to the home of the slaying of thousands of... It was called the Comedy Abattoir, basically, and I walked on stage. Actually, Ross Noble introduced me. He gave me a pep talk before the show. I was first on. He said, just relax, whatever happens out there, man, don't take it personally. I'm thinking, it's a comedy night, mate. Just chill out, Ross. I walked on stage and started talking, and then I reckon 300 people just started the chant, F*** off, Aussie, F*** off. And, it wasn't... I don't think it was the wittiest comeback that 300 people could go with, but, I just said that they disgusted me, and actually they laughed at that, so we ended up having a good time. I once got heckled in Launceston in Tasmania, and I said to the guy, look, I'm here for 1 hour, you're here for the rest of your miserable life, and you know what, no one else at Launceston liked that joke, and basically I was speaking to the people of Launceston.
Time now to hear from Lizzie Who, who's performing her show Who Cares at Gold Coast Laughs, the Canberra Comedy Festival and at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival.
I don't think I've been heckled as much as other comedians because people are scared to heckle a Asian female on stage. It's just not a good look, is it? I did have a guy say recently at the very end of my show, I was performing my whole solo show, and at the very end of the show, I think I had a minute to go, he yelled out, when does the stripping start? And oh my God.
Up next is Sam Taunton.
Once a guy said to me, your haircut is 10 years too late. And that one I kind of went, yeah, that hurts a bit. That one, that one's got me.
Here's Joel Creasey.
I don't really receive hecklers at my shows, and that is not an invite for people to come along and heckle me. It's just not one of those shows. I also happily will tell people I'm not good with hecklers. If someone heckles me, my response is like, oh, you suck. And then I have them removed by security. I have been heckled by my mother before, though. That was weird. I could hear someone making noise up the back of the room. It was at a gig in Perth. I said, let's bring the house lights up, bring the house lights up. This will be interesting. This will be funny to have, have a laugh at the person being removed from the room. And then I saw it was my own mother. And I said, bring the house lights down. Ignore that crazy lady at the back of the room.
And finally, here's Brett Blake.
An actual good heckle I have received was an Adelaide Fringe. Adelaide Fringe is like rides, there's attractions, there's carnival folk hanging around. But yeah, a guy at the back before I grab the microphone yells out, hey mate, if you're here, who's looking after the Ferris wheel? And obviously I have a mullet, look like a carnival man, so funny. Got me. He actually did. Roasted.
Well, thanks to all the comedians who took part in today's episode. If you're in Adelaide, go and see some shows at the Fringe Festival, okay? Especially stand-up comedy. You will absolutely love it. Alrighty, well, I kind of feel under pressure to finish this episode with a joke. So here we go. What's the difference between a good joke and a bad joke? Timing. That's so bad, isn't it? Alright, I'll catch you later.